Jazz Shaw will be speaking for George Phillips. George is returning from New York City. Jazz, where are you?
I'm hanging out over here. Thanks, Dad. I'd like to extend my apologies. I have George very busy all the time. Unlike the luxury of most of the local races, we're running in 8 counties that stretch all the way from Ithaca out to Poughkeepsie, down to Newburgh. I've got him on the road all the time. He has to go to D.C., he has to go to New York City. So, yeah, I keep him busy, but I happen to live in the area. He would like me to extend my thanks to you for hosting the event, particularly this organization. Having a group of citizens that are concerned with getting involved in the electoral process, with the future of their government, and particularly taking an interest in protecting the heritage of the Constitution, is a very hopeful sign in very troubled times. And we do appreciate that. This year's elections are going to be a pivotal one. So I believe that the source of many of the challenges we face today can be found in a failure to observe basic obedience, if you will, to fundamental constitutional principles. George Phillips, for those of you who don't know him, is a teacher. He teaches our young people American history. Every year he teaches them about the Constitution. In particular, he likes to teach them about Article 1, Section 8, which defines a very rigid set of rules that extends certain powers to the federal government. He also takes great care in teaching them about the 10th Amendment, these days becoming known as the Forgotten Amendment, which states that all powers not granted to the federal government are reserved to the states and to the people. And we seem to have some people in Washington who have forgotten that lately. We are running against somebody who, I hate to say it, at times does not remember that. And this kind of defines one of the reasons that George wanted to go. Because, well, for one example, there has been a suggestion that perhaps the federal government should take control of and federalize the oil industry. George wants to run because he doesn't believe that the federal government has the power to do that. And they should be constrained from doing things like that. We also are dealing with a situation where Congress has recently enacted a number of provisions in what's become known as Obamacare, the healthcare legislation, which bothered George a great deal. There were suggestions from the current leadership that the provisions did not go far enough. We should have a single payer system where the government in Washington would take over a large swath of a private industry in this country and run America's health insurance program. And let me just ask, what could possibly go wrong with that plan? We've heard other suggestions coming out, such as a massive land grab out in Utah in the Red Rock Wilderness. And that's been extended recently to a proposal that many of you may have read about to take our industrial and transportation corridor in the Hudson Valley and turn it into a national park under the control of the federal government. George doesn't believe that's a good way to go. That's a bit of an overreach of what the federal government was empowered to do by the founders. There's also the matter of how long one serves in Congress. There comes a point, particularly after, let's say, 36 years in state and federal government, where you have to wonder, because it has been quoted that some of the founders intended that we would have citizen legislators who would serve their terms and then go home and go back to work. And maybe it's time to have some new people. The last thing I'd like to point out is that we are very much concerned about the tax situation. We've all seen the headlines, New Yorkers, particularly in Broome County, some of the highest taxed in the nation. Recently, our leadership in Washington had a chance to address the question of whether or not the current tax rate, which has been in effect for almost a decade, would expire, and we would face new higher taxes starting next year, particularly on people that some choose to call the rich, but also includes many of the small business owners that provide so many of the jobs we need. Congress had the chance to act on that. They chose to leave and go home. Under the leadership of Nancy Pelosi, they left, and they're going to wait and vote on it after the election. George feels that it would have been a better idea to make that decision now before they face the wheel at election time. And it is disappointing that it happened. These are critical choices that we face. I see very clear differences between George and our opponent. He seems to like large government, more taxes, a lot of spending. We have a $14 trillion debt coming up shortly. We don't think that's the right way to go. And frankly, we need new blood, and that's what George is offering. We ask for your support, and we look forward to seeing you on November 2nd. Thank you very much.
For George Phillips, represented by Mr. Chad. What is your feeling regarding the Supreme Court ruling on campaign contributions, and why do you support campaign finance reform?
The last one was Citizens United. That was a very valid ruling. Free speech is free speech. And George absolutely feels that's true. You don't restrict it just because you have more money than somebody else. Everybody has the right to speak. It is unfortunate that not all of us have the same amount of money, but if we restrict speech to the lowest common denominator, then everybody will be reduced to basically getting a soapbox and standing out in the middle of the park and talking. We have the ability to go out and ask others to make contributions to us if we want to make speech. Corporations do the same thing. That's pretty much how it works. Speech is free in this country. Speech we like, speech we don't like. But that's America. That's the First Amendment. Speech is free.
The next question is for candidate George Phillips, represented by J.I. Shaw. Your representative criticized Obamacare. How would you want to legislate coverage for those who cannot afford coverage, or for college students who come off of their parents' policy?
There were several good portions in the Obamacare bill. George Phillips has never come out and said that the entire thing should be scrapped. We would like to have him defund and repeal portions of it which seem to be blatantly unconstitutional and not founded in good government activity rules such as competition. We'd like to have more interstate competition to drive down prices and not have it all be one big government mandate. Parts of it, such as a government mandate saying you have to buy something. But there were good parts, and we do want to see coverage for everybody, or as much as possible. And that was one of the provisions that we were actually in favor of. Nobody has ever said George wants to scrap the entire bill. That is a fallacy.
And the result of earmarks serve a useful purpose. The earmark process provides for federal money to be apportioned out for individual needs in the state. And they are useful if the need is truly federal in nature.
The problem with the system is that it is so easily and so regularly abused. When you have earmarks that are being handed down, as we do in this district on a regular basis, to people who turn out to be donors to the member who is requesting them, that raises questions. When you have earmarks that are given out, such as with the Partition Street project, if you look that up, down in the Hudson Valley, where the member may in fact have a financial vested interest in the project that's receiving the money, that raises questions. George has proposed the replacement of the earmark system with a new system of completely open and transparent federal grants that anyone could apply to, no matter whether you donated to somebody running for office or not, that would be reviewed by an impartial board, that would be made available to the public when they're being considered, that would be voted on, and then, if the need is federal in nature, yes, bring the money home, do good with it. The current system is just shrouded in secrecy in some areas, and it just reeks of favoritism. So the current system is very flawed, but yes, there is a need for occasional federal funding at the state level, certainly.
Term limits for members of Congress, please explain that.
Term limits are not constitutionally mandated, but George Phillips is absolutely in favor of them. It's going to be a hard thing to drive through. It is hard to get a group of people who have to vote to end their own jobs. It is equally hard to get a group of people who are able to pass themselves pay raises every year to stop passing themselves pay raises. We've heard a number of different proposals. The one George has heard that seems to be the most feasible is part of a citizen's proposal which has come out, which is called the Congressional Reform Act of 2011. If you happen to get wind of it and can encourage people to vote for it, it would be great. One aspect of that would be to limit all members of Congress to a total of 12 years, which would be either 6 terms in the House, 2 terms in the Senate, 1 term in the Senate, 3 terms in the House. When you're done with that, be a citizen legislature. Go back home, go back to work. Take the same benefits package as the rest of America has. Don't expect us to support you for the rest of your life. Thank you.
Shaw, what are your reasons not to support abortion in the case of rape?
Not to support abortion in the case of rape. That's a tough one. I haven't actually had that thrown at us before. George opposes third trimester abortions. He supports the ban on federal funding for abortions. He is pro-life. His family is pro-life. He doesn't apologize for that. I will be honest with you, you're going to have to get back to me. I've never asked him the question. I've never heard him speak on that particular question. I can tell you what I personally think, but I'm not here to represent me.
Why are you in favor of hydraulic fracturing for natural gas?
There's a qualifier in there, and you don't answer questions that are setups if it's not a complete question. George Phillips is not flatly, as our opponent has tried to portray him, in favor of hydraulic fracturing. What George Phillips is in favor of, and has been since the beginning, is allowing the DEC in the state of New York, the federal government, to continue the work they've been working on for more than 2 years. If, when they finish their work, their conclusion is that it is safe, that it will protect the groundwater, and New York State already has more stringent groundwater protection levels than the EPA, by the way, then, and only then, we are in favor of moving forward aggressively to take advantage of a tremendous opportunity in jobs and economic stimulus in a state that desperately needs it. We oppose Maurice Hinchey's FRAC Act because it does much more than just asking to keep groundwater clean. It brings the federal government, the EPA, into the permit process for any drilling. And as soon as you bring the federal government in, when they are not set up to do that at the EPA, you have now added years into the process of getting anything done. The DEC can handle it. This is a state matter. We don't need Uncle Sam coming in and playing nanny for us. We can decide it for ourselves.